Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to another segment of Complete Wellness with Cindy, the Busy Woman's Cheerleader. This is the channel where women from all walks of life can stop by, get tools and resources to help them thrive 360 in mind, body, spirit, and finances. I invite you to stay connected, subscribe to this channel, and visit me online at thecindyrand.com. Now for today's segment. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to another segment of Complete Wellness with Cindy, the Busy Woman's Cheerleader. I am so super excited, as usual, to be here today. But first, let's do a little housekeeping. Our quote of today is, "Life expands or shrinks in direct proportions to one's courage." And that comes from Anais Nin. All right, so today we have Victoria Pelletier, and she is a C-suite executive, speaker, author, passionate diversity and inclusion leader, personal branding and networking expert, board director. I love it. Busy woman, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Good. So let's jump right in. Tell us, give us a little bit of history about yourself. Tell us how you got started with this journey that you're on to compile multi-layers of being a busy businesswoman.
Well, so I like to describe myself, Cindy, as being a multi-potentialite. And that means I have a multitude of passions and interests that I kind of dabble in. And so I've always had side hustles and a variety of things going on, quite frankly. The path was, I was supposed to be a lawyer. That had been my plan since I was a child. But while I was in university, I worked in a bank and got promoted. And it turns out I loved the business world and I loved leading people. And so I never went to law school and I stayed in the corporate world. And I was very fortunate to be given what was a pretty big stretch role for me at 24 as the chief operating officer for an outsourcing company, because they had large financial services clients, which had been my background, obviously, and then progressed and stayed in the world of B2B professional services, up to in becoming CEO of a company a number of years ago. And then, just got involved in, because of strong brand. You mentioned that's one of the things I spent a lot of time on because of my brand and the large network I built, been pulled into sitting on boards and invited to, contribute a chapter in a book. So having written that and do public speaking, all things that fill my joy bucket, in addition to on the personal side, being a wife and a mother and a fitness fanatic and a foodie and all those things.
Awesome. That is awesome. I love it. I absolutely love it. So let's dig into personal branding. How important is that? I mean, with today, with all the little nuances going on, all the different apps for this, modules for that, how important is it to start a personal brand outside of the actual company branding?
I think it's critically important, Cindy. In fact, not just because, I mean, recognizing in business, people do business with people they like, they trust, and therefore they want to do business with, or in hiring employees, they want to work with or for. So it's critically important. But the one thing I would say, slightly different to the way in which you asked me the question, is I think there's one personal brand. And so I don't know that it needs to be different and distinct. The job title in the company you work for is one element of brand. And where I find a lot of people focus is, as they're building their LinkedIn profile, let's say, clearly that needs to be there. What do you do and who are you working for and how long have you done it? But the reality is your personal brand is the whole you, right? It's the why people want to do business with you and engage with you and network with you, or even in personal, why do people want to be friends with you? It's the values, it's the purpose and mission that you stand for, who you are as a leader, who would you be as a vendor to another company. And so I think it's important to start building the personal brand, quite honestly, as early as possible. And it's going to evolve and change, and you're going to pivot it over time as your goals and your objectives and maybe your passion changes and you pivot, and that's okay. But I encourage people to tell the whole story, not just what they do and what they have expertise or education in, but also who they are as an individual. Again, values, mission, passion. Sometimes it's just the spark of what you have in common with someone else that starts to build the bridge to build a relationship.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I mentioned that because even a lot of my clients have, and I started off that same way, exactly the exact same way. Basically, it's like you're building business brands and you're building it as almost like a third party. You're not saying I as much as you're saying your team as much. And so then at some point, of course, you're kind of weaning out and people realize there is, of course, a person behind that business. But the owners a lot of times have basically, not I, my team, and they've branded that business as that team versus an individual. My background is in accounting, so I definitely understand. I've been an accountant for almost 30 years, and I have been saying, I'm going to pull from it. I'm going to retire. I'm not doing it, but it becomes a part of you. And that particular background as well is what has allowed me to be able to help my clients at this second half of my life be able to, brand their businesses, start a business, grow the business, scale the business. Because of that background, you have to have like that foreground background of which direction to take it in to reach different dimensions. So I ask that because, again, a lot of my clients have been, and I have done it myself as well, you've been like a third party behind the business, pushing the business. It's all about the business. It's not about me. And then there comes, as you said, a pivot in life where you actually need to really let people know who's behind it, because people want to know you as a person versus you wrapped in the brand. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I completely agree with that. And that's where, I think it's, as you said, leveraging the 30 years you've got in this, you worked with a multitude of different, I'm sure, industries and people in different roles, et cetera. And it's now, how do you take that and bring that out? And so that's what you would want in your brand. It would be much more than the fact that you've got this incredible, depth of accounting expertise. All of these other, what have you learned, and how did people learn to trust you in the business you're at? It's all of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what would you say the key elements of personal branding? What would you say the top 3 things to concentrate on if a person were to be, let's just say, a newbie starting off just now personal branding? What would be the top 3 things you would suggest they work on first?
Well, the first is authenticity. Always. That'll be a life lesson I share, regardless whether it's brand or otherwise. So be incredibly authentic. You never need to think about who have I told what to. What you hone in and for one audience is slightly different than another, right? But so be completely authentic. You define, the next would be, you define the narrative, right? The personal brand is what people say about you when you are not in the room. So you're in control of that. You are CEO of brand you. You curate, you develop what that narrative is and how it ties back to your goals and your objectives. And the third would be to be incredibly consistent and relevant in all that you do and how it connects back to your brand. And again, what's your goal? So is it to build followers or become an influencer? Well, then, consistency and relevancy, can also mean what platform you're on, with what frequency are you posting. It can mean different things. But again, authenticity, you curate that narrative. You're the CEO of brand you, and then consistency and relevancy related to that.
That makes sense. Makes total sense. Thank you so much. Makes sense. So as far as leadership, what have been some of it, and I already know it's a list, if you already know, what have been some of, let's just talk about the pros and cons. Let's talk about some of the things that you have found to be beneficial in leadership. And then we're going to flip the screen and talk about some things that you found challenging in leadership.
Probably easier to start with the challenging first. Because I learned from some of those challenges. That's why I say that, Cindy. For me, I just talked about authenticity. And so that's one of the things I've learned is most beneficial for me in leadership. And coupled with that is vulnerability. And long before Brene Brown was talking about, daring and being bold around our vulnerability, I learned that it was a lesson, because I wasn't always. I showed up with, all business all the time. And I didn't share some of my backstory and lived experience and the things that made me authentically who I am and how I showed up and what drove me so much going forward. So I'd say that, that is one. 2 is this notion of humanity and human-centered leadership. I don't think there needs to be a trade-off for having a high degree of performance and expecting high productivity or, qualitative outputs with, the human side of that. We can have both. And I would argue you have better performance in business when you are a human-centered leader. And so for me, that's things like, I've told my team long before COVID and we were working remotely, there are no schedules, there's just deliverables. So let's be really clear on what success looks like, what commitment we made to our customers and to one another, and honor those. You don't need to ask me to leave early to take an aged parent to a doctor's appointment or a child to a soccer game, as long as we're meeting that. And so those are a couple that have been, for me, incredibly beneficial in building and being the kind of leader I'd want to work for and building the right kind of culture that I think others thrive in.
Right. That makes
On the
sense.
flip side, the challenges. So I've learned from some of those. One for me, the lesson I had, I mentioned being all business all the time, and maybe it was imposter syndrome. It was a lot had to do with being in a stretch role at a very early age. Again, the fear of being vulnerable and showing a personal side at work. I've been through 18 mergers and acquisitions now in my career for the companies I work for directly, let alone those I might have supported clients with.
That was the corporate behind it. I get it. Go ahead.
And usually I'm leading operations, which is where a majority of employees sit. And there's expectations through M&A activity that there's going to be synergies and cost takeout and reorganization. And so I'm usually at the heart of leading a lot of that. And I excel at that. But I think people saw my ability to perform and deliver results with a lack of empathy for the fact that, people's livelihoods were impacted. And that came because I would never shed a tear at work. I'm like, I cry at Charmin commercials, so I'm all marshmallow inside. And so, that was a challenge for me. It wasn't natural to be emotional, being vulnerable and show up in that sort of human-centered way. And so, that was a challenge I had to learn. And the other was when I shifted from moving from more frontline or entry first level line leadership roles to higher levels in the organization, my A-type personality and desire to control things, you need to stop doing that. You need to learn as you move up the ladder what you leave behind. You delegate to teams that are successful and waiting in the wings, and how you help pull them up. And so that was hard to let go, to say no to things, to delegate, to outsource and figure that out.
Right. I think in the beginning, we all kind of start off that way. I use just analogy sometimes. I said, at this point, I've really had scratches on my elbows and knee bones. I said knee bones because it's the elbows and knee bones, elbows and knee. And it's like, it's just really scarred because you have to try to figure it out. And I tell people a lot of times, I said, if you go through something or some challenge, there's some lesson that you're supposed to learn in it. And if you go through it and you don't learn anything from it, you're just going to have to repeat that lesson. And you've really wasted that time, air, and space in your life. So, I always like to hear leaders talk about how things were challenging and some of the things when they look back over their shoulder, 25, 30 years, you look back over your shoulder, you realize, it's like I was being groomed. I knew some things, but if I knew then what I know now, if I knew then what I know now, it would have been a lot of that. What do they call it? Working smarter. A lot of that working.
Exactly.
A lot of that delegation. But I think a lot of times as new executives, we find ourselves kind of nervous. You want to please. I remember those years in the beginning. You want to please. You want to make sure that you're delivering the deliverables. But you're almost afraid to entrust certain projects to your team in fear, that type A personality, in fear of them screwing something up and you have to answer for it. I get it. I completely get it. But then as you grow as a leader and you're groomed and you're seasoned, you realize that it is up to your team is only as good as you are. And it is for you to teach that team how to help you. They come in with their credentials and their different skills, soft and transferable skills, yada, 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 the drill. And it's like, I need to show you how to help me. This is your job description. But these are some things that I need for you to kind of, weave or intertwine in there so that we work cohesively. Makes sense.
Yeah, agree. And the other thing is being, quite open to go, I don't know what I don't know.
Yes, yes, yes. You don't know everything. It's to a point where, even myself, it's like, okay, I told this, well, no, I don't know everything. I know a lot, but I don't know everything. And you have to remain teachable. You have to remain teachable. Even at 75, 80 years old, I still want to be learning something new each day. So, if you don't, you become stagnant and complacent. And I don't feel like, especially as women with a lot of different dimensions, a lot of different things that we're doing. And I don't really like to say multitasking because, everybody that multitask is not multitasking well, efficiently. But multidimensional, as you are, like a multidimensional person, you're able to juggle different things, but you want to be efficient at those things. So there's a game plan or strategy, for lack of better terms, that you put into place in order to be able to, I would say, juggle and be multidimensional. What is your strategy for that?
Yeah, I've had to learn. I have a phrase, where there's conviction, there's capacity. And so the things that I choose to do either bring myself personally or professionally joy or value. So there's a, laser focus on those things. And those that do not, I say no to, I delegate, or I outsource. So, personal sort of funny story, but when I met my husband, and this is a second marriage for me, we celebrate 9 years later this week. Thank you. I had just transitioned from having a nanny because my kids were a little bit, getting a little bit older, to having, cleaners who helped out, did a lot though, around the house. And for my husband, he'd never had a cleaner in the house, let alone someone who did laundry. And he was like, oh my gosh. He's like, I don't know if I want someone like doing my underwear and and I was like, babe, let me be clear. Like, doing laundry brings me no joy. So we have two options here. I said, we can either continue to let the cleaning crew do it all. I said, or you can start doing the laundry. And so he chose to do the laundry. And so now, X many years later, he moved in with me.
That's funny.
Yeah. So I think, we need to be really disciplined about choosing the activities that we're going to be involved in. And there are so many hours in the day. So I get it. I've had times where, I one year spent 220 days on the road. So I missed children's sporting events and, class fairs or whatever. But then other times I made really critical decisions not to travel, to be able to. And so I think, I don't like when people ask me, how do you have it all? How can you have it all? I mean, the reality is you can, just not sometimes all at the same time. And I think there's compromise you're going to need to make. And not that I haven't felt guilty for choices I've made. I won't let others make me feel guilty for the choices I've made, because those were individual and they were right at the right time for either my family or my career.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. Human capital as a leader. Hey, human capital, the thing that a lot of people take for granted. How important is that to you? How do you view your human capital in your business, in your day-to-day, your nuances, your dimensions?
I mean, it's critically important in our business. And so there's been a lot of talk around, the future of work, but the reality is the future is now here. And so it's not just where people are doing work, but by whom and where the work gets done, with, very much a lens on digital transformation and automation and all these sorts of things. But what we've seen is this massive shift by employees from a perspective where they're looking to going back to purpose-led organizations and roles in which they feel they can have an impact. Ideally, that again lines back to their values and their mission. And so the workforce or in human capital holistically needs to be viewed very differently. And as leaders, we need to show up in a very different way. And so going back to that human-centered leadership, that, the expectation of the, Gen Zers, and I've got one of those, so coming out of college, and his view of job security is very different than, yours or mine or our parents' generation. And that is
Yeah.
things like investing in their skills, and so that they can remain relevant, not only for today, but the business strategy for the future.
Yeah.
And giving them flexibility, to meet the deliverables with the tools and education required to deliver those, but in a much more flexible environment, with a lot more empathy than we would have ever seen in the workforce before. So for me, that's at the forefront. I spent a significant amount of time talking about leadership and the way we need to show up and the expectations for the workforce and the kind of culture and environment that we all want to work in, and the leaders we want to work for. And quite honestly, our customers are buying from as well.
Yeah, yeah, this is true. This is true. So, how do you, I would say, motivate your human capital at this point?
Well, it's different for different people. And this is where I think many companies just sort of do this peanut butter spread across the board and say, hey, like there's a bonus pool, or, this benefits program, and we're just going to offer it carte blanche, like a blanket across. That's not everyone's motivated by the same way, just like people don't learn in very different ways. And so here's where I think, although there certainly, don't get me wrong, there's a basis for all of that for sure. But then to motivate them, it's understanding what is it? Is it going back to, is it about skills and helping someone, or is it about providing them continual education so they can better themselves, so they can challenge, like you said, at 75, when I'd be learning something new? Is it,
Right.
Is it monetary compensation? In which case there's only a certain level you can get, or you need to change the type of role where it's, you're in sales and it's unlimited or not capped, to recognizing who is really driven by, I'll say recognition, but I'm not talking about like the ribbons and fancy, awards that come out, but the live conversation and recognition maybe within the organization to people that matter to them. So that's where, as a leader, it's really important to understand, again, what motivates. So my work around diversity and inclusion a lot is understand people's why and their lived experience. It contributes to how we show up at work every day, and oftentimes what motivates us and wants to move forward. So as a leader, I think we need to figure that out. And it might be 5 different things for 10 different people on the team that will motivate.
Yeah, yeah. There's no cookie cutter. That's the thing. If that were the case, it would be simple. That's a simplified process. But you've got different people from different walks of lives. You've got different people with different values, different cultures, different understandings, different processes. Everybody is different, and you have to respect those differences, but find a way to put us all in the same pot and make us cohesive and work together to get to the finish line. Get to the finish line. I remember a couple of times, even myself in the past, and I said, well, I want to tell you how to get there. But at this point, when you have the tools and the resources that you need, I'm not going to tell you how to get to the finish line as long as we both get there at the same time. And I think that new generation that's coming up, because I've got a millennial, but that new generation that's coming up, they're very, what's a nice word I can use? They're brilliant. Do not get me wrong. They are brilliant. They are driven. They're determined. Very innovative, to a point where you can only respect it. Respect the fact that now the traditional things don't always work for everybody, and it's okay. What used to work, 20 years, 30 years, maybe 10 years ago, things are progressing at a different level. So it's all to be, what is that? Diversity and inclusion. All of these different skill sets that people bring in. You have to find a way as a leader, of course, to be able to work around whatever the obstacles are, whatever, the issues or concerns. Sometimes, and I was thinking when you made mention of that A personality, ... I'm not going to talk about the A personality, okay? But I thought about, when you said that, I thought about the time that I was presenting the financials to one of the boards that I was, and one of the board members said, Cindy, I really like you. And I want you to listen to me. And I said, okay. And I'm standing here with all these, little cachets and folders to give them these fancies for these numbers for the quarter. He said, we were talking about you earlier. He said, we like you because you think like a man. And I said, wait a minute, what? And I was like, what? And no, and that's why he told me he wanted me to listen, to hear him out before I reacted. He was saying that I was not an emotional person. He was saying that normally, ladies were they make decisions off emotions. But he noticed, or they noticed, that, I'm regimented. I'm regimented. And so, I try to, I'm the most optimistic person you could ever meet. So I always try to glean good from things, even when it may have like undertones of something negative. I decided to take that as a compliment, but then it's like I questioned myself and I said, well, I know that I'm structured, because I've been behind the wall for decades. I know that I'm to be. I have to have, processes in place, but I'm also a free spirit. And a lot of times people don't know that or didn't know that because you're used to seeing this person that has to have everything just so in order to accomplish the goals for the department or for the agency or for the company or what have you. But a lot of times in levels of leadership, you do find yourself, I don't know if I should say suppressing your personality, which is hard to do, but some people suppress for certain environments their personality. But, and I think you can relate to this. I'm kind of a wide open type of person too. And so, if I'm going to laugh, I laugh. I don't care. I've been called brutally honest because I'm a straight shooter. Yeah, I'm a straight shooter. I shoot straight from the hip. I filter it. Looking back, do you find it more beneficial that you're able to just, if I want to laugh, I laugh, or it's just me? I mean, how do you feel about that now?
Yeah, no, that for me was a big lesson. So I, like you, Cindy, was at one point, I've been told also that I act like one of the guys, like in the work, and I'm used to being one of the only women anyways. But at one point I found out my nickname was the Iron Maiden. And
Whoa.
it's so I was trying to figure out, was this a compliment or an insult? And it was on the heels of some of these like transformational work activities, and I might have been after an acquisition and going through a reorganization. And so I was like, oh, that's really unfortunate. But it didn't, and it was kind of like, but it was a couple of months later, I came in on a Monday morning and one of my colleagues and I were talking about our weekends. And I said, oh, I don't even remember what the movie was, but I was crying, bawling. I didn't have enough Kleenex. It was like, I was a mess. And she kind of looked at me and she's like, oh my God, Vic. She's like, I thought you'd be the type of person who'd laugh at people who cry at movies. That hit me. Because as I said, like Humane Society commercials, you name it, like at a drop of the hat, like I'm crying, I'm highly emotional. And I realized that I was showing up in a certain way, and some part, like I'm very buttoned up. I was running large scale operations. You need to be, but I've also going through these exercises of managing performance, et cetera. But I never showed the real human side in a way that mattered. Because I was afraid of being told I was, too emotional, too sappy, too soft to be able to do the work. And, but I also realized the flip side of that was that, I'd say my employees probably feared me. They wouldn't have followed me into a proverbial fire. Right. So I actually had to do things differently. So for me, being authentic, being vulnerable, showing up my whole self in person doesn't mean I don't filter and occasionally sugarcoat some things when I need to, but otherwise context matters. Again, the humanity component matters. So that's made a world of difference for me now, once I learned how to do that. And it was uncomfortable to show up at work that way. I was quite comfortable doing it on the personal side. But I think the more you lean into the things that make you uncomfortable and the more times you do it, it becomes way more natural to the point now it's just innate in who I am.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. That kind of intertwines into personal branding, not just on the internet, but in person. That intertwines. Your team will follow you into a burning fire, burning building when they feel like they've connected to you, like they know you, or they know some parts of you. They've seen the vulnerability. They've share some stories. I remember at one point, and it just depends on my stress level and what quarter and which report and whatever I had to do. But sometimes you end up with like needy staff. The ones that always want to go through the long list of their weekend, and the cat, the dog, Fluffy had kittens or whatever, and you're thinking about your deadline that's at 9 o'clock, and it's like 8:44, and you're still talking about cat and the Fluffy. So, and then you have some of those who, again, similar to you, are regimented, but you try to break into that by sometimes showing a little of your authenticity, just a little of your personality. The fact that you're not Iron Woman, you actually do laugh, you feel, you bleed blood like everybody else. It's just really interesting a lot of times with it, and I knew we were going to have a time with this leadership conversation because there's so many, again, and I go back to nuances. There's so many nuances, and they're not really like cookie cutter plans, but it all intertwines with who you are as a person, your authenticity as a person, and your personal brand on and off line, on and off the field, in and out of the office.
Right. And going back, yeah, like I said earlier, like I never want to have to remember who I said what, like there's no, I just had to bring down the mask, period. And so my brand is my brand, period. So, what you see on camera or screen or whatever, wherever you're setting you're listening or seeing me in, I'm the same when you meet me in person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the thing that's kind of funny sometimes, because people have this idea, and then when they meet you, it's like, oh, well, she's probably going to be this way or that way. No, what you see is what you get. I mean, laughing, and I'm always that way. I'm just that way. You just have to be who you are and be accepted like that, and learn to work around the team, work with and around the team. So with your busyness, busy woman question of the day, what do you do for your downtime, for your balance? How do you find balance, or what do you do to make sure that you're balanced with all the things that you do?
So the one thing I do every day or 6 days a week, I'm a fitness fanatic. So, working out for me, even though incredibly active, that is my downtime. I've got my AirPods on, I'm starting with a podcast, and then I either listen to an audiobook or go just listen to some music that pumps me up. But that for me is my time, calming time. So that's something I do. And I block my calendar before 9 a.m. And I'm in a North American role, so it's fine. When I was in a global role, much more challenging, so that no one books me for early calls, so that I can, get back home and have a shower and all of that kind of thing. So that's number one. Number two is there are times, however, where, and I joke with my husband, where I say I'm on all day, right? I'm constantly on Zoom calls now that we're back to in-person meetings. And so at the end of the day, and oftentimes on the weekend, I want to do nothing. You're not getting me talking on the phone on the weekends. In fact, I changed my voicemail message that it's better just to email or text me. But it's like something mindless. Like I just want to sit and have a great glass of wine, watch something mindless on Netflix or whatever, and do nothing. So that's my real downtime. But on a daily basis, my time at the gym is me time, and helps set me up for the rest of the crazy busy day.
That's awesome. That is so awesome. It's good. Again, regimented. Okay. Type A, regimented. That's regimented 6 days a week.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah, I got my
you got
treadmill.
it. You got it.
Gotcha. So listen, what are some key takeaways? Give us a couple key takeaways from today.
Well, the ones that we, spoke most on, so are around personal brand. But before that, I'll say, first of all, I live this like unstoppable, completely relentless mantra and life philosophy. I let nothing stop me from getting what I want, the goals I've set my mind to. I do give myself permission to fail or stumble and get back up. So that's just my life and my mantra. The next is around, you know, big part of career success I attribute to having built a really strong brand, and but by extension of that, the network I've built both organically and also with strategic intentionality around who I was going to choose to meet would be the other. The next is around that, what you and I talked about around continuous learning. Always be developing our skills, not just to be relevant for the environment we're in today, but where it's going, and continuing to build upon that. And that this notion of creating boundaries, how being busy, how do you manage it? Where there's, conviction, there's capacity, being diligent about what fills up your joy bucket or brings you value, and saying no, outsource, delegate. Those are things that I'd leave with the listening audience today, as some of the things that I think if you adopt all of that, it can be, highly successful in whatever you choose.
That's right. That's right. I love it. I love it so much. So if people want to get in contact with you, how would they do that?
You can Google me and I'm most of the first probably 8 or 10 pages that comes up. However, the easiest way is just find me on my personal website, which is just Victoria-Pelletier.com. And I'm sure you'll have show notes or whatever if they're trying to figure out the spelling of that.
We will. I have enjoyed you so much.
Thank you for having me, Cindy. Loved it.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Thank you again for tuning in to Complete Wellness with Cindy, the Busy Woman's Cheerleader. Follow me on social media at Busy Woman's Cheerleader. Remember, together we write our stories, share our journeys, create memories, and leave our marks in history. Until next time, peace, blessings, and joy be multiplied to you. Ta-ta.